The first time she tried the route, she was terrible at it. A bee released into a field with 5 flowers did what looked at first like wandering. She flew too far. She doubled back. She revisited flowers that were already empty. She spent nearly 2,000 meters doing a job that could be done in less than 500. Then she tried again, and again. By the time she had learned the field, the same bee had cut the route down to 458 meters. She had not grown a larger brain. She had not been given a map. She had not compared every possible route, because with 5 flowers, there are already 120 possible sequences, and a bee does not have the time, energy, or nervous system to test them all. Her brain is smaller than a grain of rice, but she solved the route anyway. That is the part I cannot stop thinking about. Not that bees are smart in the way we usually use that word. That is too simple. The stranger thing is that an animal with less than 1 million neurons, a body that will be worn out in weeks, and a life measured in flights, can look at the world of flowers around your garden and quietly answer a problem humans built computers to handle. She does not solve it by thinking like us. She solves it by surviving. If that changes how you look at the bee moving between your flowers, subscribe. New video every week. Stay until the end, because the final part is not the mathematics. It is what this means for the few weeks she has, and why every wrong turn costs more than you think. Most people watching a bee in a garden assume the movement is simple. She smells a flower, flies to it, drinks, then sees or smells another one and moves again. Lavender, then clover, then rosemary, then maybe back to the lavender because that is where she started. It looks loose. It looks improvised. It looks like the kind of motion that does not need much explanation. And sometimes at the very beginning, that is close to true. A new forager does not come into the world already knowing your garden. She has to learn it. The distance from the hive, the angle of the sun, the wind over the fence, the bright patch of flowers by the path, the shadow of the tree that looks different in the morning than it does in the afternoon. The fact that one group of flowers gives more nectar than another, but only at certain times. Have you ever watched a bee long enough to notice that she is not always moving to the nearest flower? That detail matters. If she only chose the nearest visible flower every time, her route would often be wasteful. The nearest flower might already be empty. It might pull her in the wrong direction. It might save 2 seconds now and cost 30 seconds later. The problem she faces is not find a flower. Any bee can find a flower in a good garden. The problem is how to visit several useful places in an efficient order and return with enough reward to make the flight worth the cost. That is where the simple picture breaks. The bee is not just collecting nectar. She is managing a route. In human mathematics, a version of this is called the traveling salesman problem. The classic form is easy to state and hard to solve. Given a list of places, what is the shortest possible route that visits each one and returns home? For a few places, you can test the options. For many places, the number of possible routes explodes so quickly that brute force becomes absurd. The bee does not know the name of the problem. She just has to live inside it. A foraging bee has a crop to fill, energy to conserve, weather to beat, predators to avoid, and a hive that does not reward beautiful theory. The route either works or it costs too much. The flowers either give enough or they do not. The flight either brings her back with value or it slowly spends the short adult life she has. This is why the research is so interesting. Scientists did not need to ask whether bees understand mathematics. That would be the wrong question. They asked something sharper. When a bee has several feeding locations available, does she gradually build a more efficient route between them? The answer was yes. In one experiment, researchers at Queen Mary University of London worked with bumblebees in an open field. They placed artificial flowers far enough apart that the bees could not simply see the next one from where they stood. Each flower gave only part of the food a bee wanted, so she had a reason to visit all of them. Then the researchers tracked the bees as they flew, trip after trip, while the routes changed from messy exploration into something much more efficient. At first, the routes were long and complicated. The bees returned to empty flowers. They took unnecessary loops. They flew as if the field had not yet become a map inside them. Then the routes started tightening. The bee did not test all 120 possible routes. She did not need to. She tried enough. She remembered enough. She kept what improved the trip and abandoned what did not. After roughly 20 attempts, the bees had discovered highly efficient routes through the flowers. That is the part that feels almost unfair to the human ego. We are used to thinking intelligence should look expensive. More neurons, larger brains, more calculation, more conscious planning. But here is an animal whose brain weighs around a milligram, finding a near-optimal path through a changing world by using memory, trial, error, and rules simple enough to fit inside a head you could barely see if it were placed on your fingertip. What this means for the bee in your garden is not that she is secretly doing algebra over your flower beds. It means her movement may be the visible edge of a learning process. The first visit to your garden might be exploration. The second might be correction. By the 10th, she may have a sequence. Not a perfect map like the one you would open on a phone, but a working path. Over the fence, past the bright wall, to the lavender first, then the clover, then the rosemary only if the scent is strong enough, then back toward the hive before the wind changes. You see a bee moving from flower to flower. She may be editing a route. This route-building behavior is often called traplining. The word comes from human trap lines, where a person checks a series of traps in a repeated order. In bees and other pollinators, it means repeated visits to flowers or flower patches in a sequence that becomes familiar over time. It is not random wandering. It is not a fixed railway track either. It is flexible memory under pressure. That flexibility is important because flowers are not vending machines. A flower that had nectar 10 minutes ago may be empty now. A patch that was useful yesterday may be poor today. A garden that was rich in the morning may be less valuable in the afternoon. Nectar refills, wind changes, shadows move, competitors arrive. A route that was efficient at 9 in the morning might be wrong by noon. So the bee's problem is harder than the classroom version. The traveling salesman problem in mathematics usually assumes the cities stay where they are and the distances do not change. The bee's version has moving sunlight, changing reward, memory limits, weather, predators, and flowers that can be temporarily drained by another bee minutes before she arrives. And she still has to make the trip worth it. This is where smaller than a grain of rice stops being a cute fact and becomes the center of the story. The small brain is not a weakness the bee overcomes by becoming human-like. It is the reason the solution is so elegant. She cannot afford wasteful calculation. She cannot sit still and model every possibility. She cannot plan like a mathematician at a desk. The world forces her to use a cheaper kind of intelligence. Try, remember, compare, repeat. If a new path is shorter, keep it. If a flower disappoints too often, reduce it. If a sequence works, return to it until the world changes. This is not a grand theory inside the bee's head. It is practical memory shaped by hunger. And that may be the most beautiful part, because the more you study it, the less the bee looks like a tiny computer, and the more she looks like something stranger, a living compromise between limitation and precision. Her brain cannot do everything, so it does what matters. It compresses the garden into usable decisions. Have you ever taken the same shortcut so many times that you stopped thinking about it? You do not calculate every street each morning. You know the turn that saves time. You know which crossing is slow. You know the path that feels shorter, even before you can explain why. Part of your world has become a route. The bee does something like that, but with far less room for error. For you, a bad route might cost 5 minutes. For her, it costs flight energy, daylight, risk, and a fraction of a life that may only last 6 weeks in summer. She is not optimizing because optimization is interesting. She is optimizing because waste is expensive. Inside the hive, that personal route can become part of something larger. A honeybee returning from a strong source can dance, communicating direction, distance, and quality to others. Bumblebees do not use the honeybee waggle dance in the same way, but they also learn profitable routes and return to them. Across species, the pressure is similar. Flowers are spread across space, and a small flying body has to turn that space into profit. So when you see a bee in your garden, the question is not only where is she going? The better question is, how many times has she already solved this? She may have found your garden yesterday. She may have been recruited by another bee's information. She may be comparing your flowers with a patch 2 streets away. She may be discovering that your lavender is worth the flight only after the sun reaches it. She may be removing one flower from her root because it stopped paying. She may be adding another because it suddenly opened. And right now, while you are watching this, bees in gardens like yours are doing that everywhere. Not one grand calculation, millions of small root edits. A bee leaves a hive, tests a patch, learns a better turn, returns with nectar, and tomorrow, her flight is slightly cleaner. Another bee abandons a poor flower after too many empty visits. Another discovers a richer patch and reshapes her morning around it. From the outside, it all looks like buzzing. From inside the life of the bee, it is a map being carved by cost. This is the part where the scale becomes difficult to hold in your head. Your garden is not just a place with flowers. To a forager, it is a set of distances, rewards, landmarks, scents, risks, and memories. The fence is not decoration. The tree is not background. The bright wall, the gap between houses, the angle of the morning light, the row of lavender, the clover near the lawn edge. These can become parts of a route. You live beside a landscape of calculations you never see, and none of them require the bee to understand what calculation is. That distinction matters because people often ruin animal intelligence by forcing it to resemble our own. We ask whether bees are really thinking, whether they really know the shortest route, whether they really understand the problem. But maybe that is the wrong way to look at it. The bee does not need our kind of understanding. She needs a body and brain tuned tightly enough to the problem that the right behavior emerges from repeated contact with the world. She learns the route by flying it. She improves the route by surviving the cost of flying it badly. In the Queen Mary experiments, this is what made the results so striking. The bees were not handed a diagram. The shortest path was not marked for them. They discovered efficient routes through experience, and the improvement happened quickly enough that the researchers could watch it develop across repeated trips. A poor route became a better one. A messy field became a sequence. Now bring that back to the bee you actually see. The bee on your flower is not performing an abstract puzzle for a scientist. She is trying to make the morning pay. If your garden is dense with flowers, the problem becomes easier. If the flowers are scattered, cut off, sprayed, or poor in nectar, the route becomes harder. If there are long gaps between useful patches, every gap is a cost. If your lavender is one of the few good stops in the area, then that one patch matters more than it looks. This is not a gardening lecture. It is just what the bee is experiencing. A flower is not only beautiful to her, it is a point on a route. A patch is not only colorful, it is a reason to spend energy. A garden is not only scenery, it is either worth entering into memory or it is not. That is why the phrase, just a bee, feels smaller the longer you think about it. Just a bee, with a brain smaller than rice, moving through a world too large for her to understand completely. Just a bee, learning a route without language. Just a bee, solving enough of the problem to keep coming back. Just a bee, spending part of the only summer she will ever have on the flowers outside someone's window. I know this sounds like I am reading too much into a flight path, but I do not think I am. The mathematics is impressive. but it is not the emotional part. The emotional part is that the bee does not solve the root in a vacuum. She solves it because she has to. Every loop she removes from the root gives her a little more life to spend on useful work. Every empty flower she stops visiting saves a little energy. Every better sequence means the same tiny body can bring more back before her wings wear out. For us, efficiency can feel cold. For her, efficiency is mercy. The shortest route is not a trick. It is less wasted flight, less exposed time, less energy burned between flowers, less of a 6-week life spent on nothing. The bee is not optimizing a chart. She is trying to make a body last long enough to finish its work. And maybe that is why this subject stays with me more than the phrase bee math suggests. It is not because bees secretly beat humans at mathematics. They do not. Humans can define the problem, prove the difficulty, build algorithms, send machines across cities, and solve versions no bee could ever approach. But the bee does something we often forget to respect. She solves the version that matters to her. No symbols, no equations, no whiteboard, no understanding of what a problem is. Just the pressure of flowers spread across space, a nervous system small enough to disappear on the tip of your finger, and a life short enough that there is no room to be inefficient for long. Tomorrow morning, if a bee returns to your garden, watch the second flower. Not the first one, the second. The first flower tells you where she arrived. The second tells you whether she is wandering. Does she go to the nearest bloom, or does she skip it? Does she cross the same gap twice? Does she work the patch in a pattern? Does she leave and come back along a similar line? You may not see the whole route. You probably will not. But for a moment, you may see the edge of it. A small brain turning your garden into order. And as she comes back the next day, that is not nothing. It means something in the route worked. Your flowers fit into the sequence. The cost was worth it. Out of all the spaces she could have searched, your garden became one of the places her brain kept. That is the real hook hidden inside the science. A bee's brain is smaller than a grain of rice, but somewhere inside that tiny nervous system, there may be a working memory of your garden. Not as you see it, not as a place of color and calm, but as a chain of useful decisions under a moving sun. She does not know she is solving a famous problem. She does not know humans gave it a name. She does not know anyone is impressed. She only knows the route is shorter now than it was before. And for an animal with 6 weeks, that is enough. Have you ever watched a bee return to the same flowers in your garden more than once? Did you think it was random, or did it look like she knew exactly where she was going? Tell me what you noticed. I read every single comment, especially the ones where someone realizes the thing they have been seeing for years was never random at all. Subscribe for the next one. And the next time a bee crosses your garden without stopping at the closest flower, remember, she may not be lost. She may have already solved the morning.